Charfaray and the Madinah Institute and Leadership for giving me this opportunity today to present to you on a very important topic, I think, that affects most of our businesses today. And that specifically is how to capitalize on organizational health and also look at employee engagement. I believe there's many of you that are on the group at the moment that have probably gone through many employee engagement assessment tools to identify what the engagement levels are. And what I'd like to really look at today are the few important objectives for today's webinar. So once again, Mr. Ali Jaffrey, thank you very much, and thank you to Madinah Institute and Institute of Leadership Development. So let's look at some of the objectives that we want to look at today, specifically in the time that we have. We have approximately 40 minutes, and I'm sure you have many questions. And like Mr. Jaffrey says, we can always look at those questions later. I'm hoping that some of the discussion that I will be taking you through here today, I would have already put many of the questions at ease for you. So let's quickly look at some of the objectives. One of the main objectives is looking at how to measure and manage your organization's employee engagement levels. Now, there are many engagement tools that are out there to help you to measure it, but one important thing is, how do we actually manage it? And I'm going to be sharing some results with you today to show you that in the last few years, there hasn't been much movement around the levels of employee engagement throughout the world. And we need to look at how and why those are the actual reasons. Being an ecometric practitioner myself, in terms of looking at intrinsic values and motives, and also looking at how to manage people within various roles, particularly also involved with many women that are looking for leadership roles around how to manage people. I think this area will be very important for you as an objective specifically. Secondly, we're going to be looking at capitalizing on some of the constructs, although there are 7 that are mentioned here, but of course there are many other constructs, and particularly around the organizational health to improve productivity. Now, when we look at the two together, it is employee engagement levels and what that impact has on the organizational health in terms of productivity as such. Then we'll be looking at understanding your greatest asset. And I stress here that people are the greatest asset, and we hear this all the time. In many organizations, people talk about your most valued asset, which is people. And we want to talk about today is that, are we actually recording these people that we say are greatest assets on our balance sheets? And I challenge every manager out there and every CEO out there that has the placards on their boards and doors that says our greatest asset is our people. And my question to you today is that if our greatest asset is the people, then are we actually able to record them on our balance sheet? Are they recorded there? Do we have them? Can we see what kind of an asset, and do we actually have a figure that values that asset as such? So only then we can say that our people are our greatest asset. And I'm going to put the challenge out there today in this particular webinar. And then, of course, we're going to look at understanding the direct link between ecometrics. And we talk about ecometrics very productively together with psychometrics. They both go hand in hand, but if you look at ecometrics, it specifically talks about the human adaptability and its working environment. So it's not just about what our drivers are, what actually our personality is, but rather in adaptation to the current environment in which each of us is functioning. In other words, it could be our work environment. We might have a completely different ecometric result, or within our home environment, we will have something completely different. So that together goes hand in hand with our well-being indicators, because if we are valued in terms of what our link is to human adaptability, then we find that we can actually get holistic organizational health within all our organizations. So I'm trusting that most of you that have actually signed in, that these objectives will meet your objectives of what you actually require. And of course, if anything else around that, we can answer any questions. So let's look firstly at, if we start off with the workforce engagement and retention challenges. So before I move on to the next slide, just a quick introduction into engagement and retention. Employees are the key to every success of an organization, and I think most of us would agree with that. Effective management practices ensures that employees remain with the company and produce quality work. Now, we know that that is effective, but we also know that if it's not properly managed, developed or valued, or even being engaged properly, these employees investigate the prospects of better career opportunities in most other organizations. Now, many of us who are leaders, who are HR directors, we know the consequence of that. We know that it costs a company on average approximately 1.5 times that person's annual salary if that person joins on the organization and leaves at least within 6 months or more. Data emerging from the annual Deloitte Best Company to Work For survey actually suggests that what employers regard as important is typically not really what employees are most concerned about. And there's where the discrepancy is that there isn't an understanding of what's important to both the employer and the employee. Every enterprise, therefore, must reconcile at least two most important propositions in our mind. One is we look at all business problems are people problems. Generally, we find that most of our business have people issues within them. And of course, we know that people problems are also the business problems. So vice versa, you'll find that every individual in an organization is going to have some issue with another person or the other, and therefore that affects productivity. What we don't know about employees generally will control performance and production results, and of course success of our business terms. So most importantly, unless appropriate action is taken to correctly identify and address any dissatisfaction an employee has within an organization, it will result in a spike of our employee turnover. And one of the biggest causes of that is that we are not properly engaged with either employees, between employees and the employer. So that is what we're going to be looking at specifically around today from an introduction perspective. So when we look at the 4 key areas for profitability, one of the things that, being a CEO of Training Excellence myself in both South Africa and of course in the Middle East, I've worked in the last 7 years now in the Middle East, we found that if we speak the language of the following, then we are talking profitability. Number 1 is, are we able to reduce cost within our organizations? Can we increase turnover or profits? Are we able to increase productivity? And of course, increased efficiency or improve performance. So if you look at that, we are looking at 1 minus and 3 pluses. The aim of this is to look at how do we work and use employee engagement within our organizations to actually reduce the cost, increase productivity, increase turnover, and increased efficiency, which in turn improves the performance of people as well. So if we concentrate on those 4 key areas of profitability, then you find that human capital employee or staff or worker, if we see them, we can either see them in 2 ways. We can see them either as a liability or as a cost, or we can see them as an asset. Now, in many organizations, I do a lot of consulting around the country, and if we look at many of the organizations, many people actually see staff as a liability of or the cost, because there's certain things that are lacking, which that employee is either not giving the organization, or the employee is not actually recognizing it. In other words, valuing the employee with that particular asset, right? So if we look at them, if we look at all the entire human capital as a liability or cost, then generally our aim and objectives or strategic plan starts going down to downsizing. We start looking at cutting cost. We start looking at, well, the people that are currently functioning, what's the minimum number of people we need to run this place on? In other words, we actually start squeezing those that are really doing well and exceptional because we can't get it out of the rest of the employees. Then we're actually striving to just an average or perhaps sometimes even a good organization. So I think each one of us must sit down today and ask ourselves, are we happy with average? Are we happy with good? And if that's the case, then generally we're happy with seeing human capital as liabilities or cost. And of course, if not, and if we want to see our human capital as assets, then we need to start, then we can start looking at things like responsible restructuring, where we start looking at the asset which actually needs to be developed and grown. We start looking at how we can take these people that we already have and use them more effectively, and not just the few that are doing well, but also every single individual. And that is why it's important that we look at our employee engagement levels and find out what is the percentage of our people that are actually currently engaged. And the people that are not, how do we get them on board to get them engaged so that we can use them more effectively? Then we start looking at our organizations as great organizations and not just an average organization as such. So moving on, the payoff. If we start looking at employees as assets, one of the biggest payoffs is that employees themselves feel valued. And I think you and I as individuals, before we were CEOs and before we were leaders in any particular organization, we know what it was like when people around us didn't value our worth or value what we did and how we contributed to the organization. So the organization is viewed as employee of first choice. Every one of us would like our companies to be viewed as employee of first choice, because then we have the flocks of those that are actually really good at what they do joining us. We'll start getting good investors. Employment security for our employees is there. We'll have a low staff turnover rate. And of course, sources of innovation, creativity, and renewal will be the height within our organizations because our employees are feeling valued. And that's because we are seeing them as an asset. And of course, in turn, it has a ripple effect on all the things that we want to increase. Example, happy customers, higher profitability, etc. So that is some of the advantages and the payoff of looking at our employees as assets. I'd like to share a case study that we've looked at, and we talk about SaaS. They are one of the world's largest privately held software businesses, and its software is used by most of Fortune 500 companies. They've been voted one of the best companies to work for in Fortune's annual ranking each year since the last inception in 1997. Now that's many years, right? Ranked number 2 on the elite top 25 world's best multinational workplaces list from Great Places to Work For in 2014. And they're also number 2 among Fortune's 2014 best companies to work for in the US. Now, looking at that credentials, something they are doing is right, and it has to do with the people. So employee turnover at SAS is very low. It's about 4% per year compared to the average in the software industry of about 20%. So again, what are they doing differently that makes a difference of at least 16%? Given the size of its workforce, plus the 1.5 times annual salary, fully loaded cost, which we know will cost a company if people leave before, SAS's 16% lower turnover translates into opportunity savings in excess of almost $100 million every year. Now that's remarkable. SAS offers on-site daycare services. Here are some of the things they offer which is different. Medical services are provided to employees and their families. Employees are encouraged to work 35-hour weeks and have a free access to a recreation and fitness center. It also hosts a summer camp for children and operates on-site cafeterias and cafes. And 22.5 tons of M&Ms are provided each year. Now, that's my kind of company that I'd like to work for, especially being such a sugarholic, in jars that are refilled every Wednesday. Now, people, it's not just about what the company does for you, but it's rather the things that are important to its staff is what is measured against. So in other words, some of the staff members actually believe that some of these things are important to them. And it's done through their surveys and their assessments that they've got to identify what is important and what is valued by the people that actually work for them in their organization. If we look at that, on the 25th anniversary of the founding of the SAS Institute, the co-founder, Dr. James Goodnight, remarked, and I quote, "We knew that if we focused on our employees and our customers, the company would prosper. It sounds very simplistic then, just as it does today. But I think history has shown that taking care of employees has made the difference in our employees who take care of our customers. With that as our vision, the rest takes care of itself." Again, quote, 95% of a company's assets drive out the front gate every night. And the CEO must see to it that they return the following day. Now, I love that, because if we look at our assets, if we have a truckload of assets that are driving out, we're always constantly making sure that that asset returns safely to where it's supposed to be as part of the organization. And if we start seeing our staff in that light, that they are driving out every day as an asset, then we must make sure that we see to it that they do return the following day to an environment that meets their needs and meets their requirements. And that's what Ecometrics is all about, is matching the need of the individual to the environment in which they're functioning. So if we look at this, employees are your biggest investment and therefore should bring the greatest reward. They are viewed as an asset to be managed, but rather as individuals who can create the next innovation for success. And if we view them as a next innovation for success, then we don't have to just view them as an ordinary asset. They're much more than just that. Okay, so taking that case study into perspective, what I'd like to look at and discuss exactly is what is an ecometric. We all know that a metric is a measurement. When we look at the world leading assessment tools that are out there, including, for example, reality check ecometrics, we're looking at Myers-Briggs assessments, which is more psychological. They are very powerful assessment tools that is able to assess the ecometric, which means the human adaptability to the environment in which they're actually functioning. So when we look at that, let's break it down. If we look at ecology, it is a scientific analysis and study of interactions amongst organisms and their environment. When we look at human ecology, it is a scientific discipline of the adaptation between humans and the environment. So in other words, how do people adapt to the current environment that they're actually functioning in? And then, of course, you have the ecometric, which is the quantification of human behavior within the defined specific environment. So here we are looking at it measures in context to the actual ecology. Many of us who have actually done many psychometric assessments, we know that if we, example, do a Myers-Briggs assessment, you find that it basically kind of puts us into a kind of a box. And that box tells you that you are either an introvert or an extrovert, you're either judgmental or you're this or you're that. But what happens is our environment changes almost every second here. We're either changing within our jobs, or we're changing within our positions, or we're changing actual environments or fields of study that we've decided to move into. And each time we evolve, we actually change and adapt because we are learning all the time. And that's what ecometrics is about. And that's your slight difference with the psychometrics, is that ecometrics will actually measure you in terms of the environment in which you're functioning at the moment compared to where you were. So when we do that and we understand the process, you'll find it very clear that what Peter Drucker has actually said becomes the reality, is that if we can't manage, you can't manage what you can't measure. So in other words, if we haven't measured what our employee engagement levels are, if we haven't measured what our driving dynamics or what is our health status within our organization like, then it's very difficult for us to manage the people around us. So firstly, as a leader, it's important for us to be able to manage that. So if we look at the three areas specifically, what we should measure. Number one is employee engagement, the human capital balance scorecard, which is what we then look at in terms of well-being indicators specifically, and of course then the culture. So in order for us to ensure that we have the right people in the right positions, and also that those people are actually happy, these three things are critical for us to be able to look at in terms of how we actually measure it. And of course, the results will then take us forward as to what becomes our strategy for the coming years. So engaging all three is essential, particularly in employee engagement and organizational health. So I'd like to tackle each one individual. And if we start with employee engagement particularly first, let's look at some of the research and why. If we look at the study in terms of the global human capital trends of 2015, the research involved surveys and interviews with more than 3,300 businesses and HR leaders, which was done over 106 countries. And during the survey, this survey actually assesses the importance of specific talent, changes, and readiness to meet them. Now, the question is, when I show you the next graph, I'd like all of you to look at the graph and look at your own organizations as such to say that how is it that where do you actually fit? All right, so if you look at Global Human Capital Trends 2015, on the left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the importance that has been measured. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that you have the readiness of every organization across the studies that was done by Deloitte University Press. And if you look at the very first one is culture and engagement. And it says that the important levels of that is between 78 and 80. And of course, from a readiness perspective, you can see that we're definitely in deficit of a lot there. And of course, we're right below in terms of 47. And there are many others, like, for example, leadership, learning and development, reinventing HR, and so forth. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to focus on the culture and engagement. So if you look at that, it highlights the need for every business and HR leader to gain a clear understanding of their organization's culture and re-examining ways to better engage and empower people. So this is what the presentation today is about, is how do we actually look at, how do we engage these people further? And the first step, of course, is to do an assessment to see exactly where we're at and what is our engagement levels. So during a study that was done over more than 7,000 HR and business leaders from approximately 130 countries, you will find that Deloitte, basically Global Human Capital Trends 2015 study, when they approached all these employers within these organizations and they asked them, what was one wish that you would have? If there was one wish you could have, what was it? And I'm sure many of us are dealing with many things like high profitability, increased productivity, and so forth. And here's what they actually came up with in terms of an average. Is that all they're really looking for is engaged personnel. And if we can actually get people more engaged, you'll find that all of the things I mentioned in the beginning will increase. And of course, we'll also be able to reduce our cost. So if we look at employee engagement in terms of a definition, what we're looking at here, the Gallup organization, as we all know, is a leader in employee engagement research. They found that employee physical health and psychological well-being affects the quality and quantity of the work, as we had mentioned. After 25 years of research on the construct of employee engagement, Gallup put forward that a high number of engaged employees will help that organization attract more talented people, while disengaged employees, on the other hand, will cost an organization in areas with lower productivity, higher absenteeism, recruitment, and of course training. So when we look at employee engagement as a definition, it is a workplace approach which results in the right conditions for all employees of an organization to give off their best every day. These are the people that are engaged all the time. They give their best. They're committed to their organizational goals, their values. They're motivated to contribute to organizational success with an enhanced sense of their own well-being. If your people love their work and the environment you have created, they will treat customers better, innovate, and continuously improve your own business. So if we look at the three factors that stand out as driving focus on engagement, first, there is intense competition for talented millennials, many of whom are less loyal to organizations than ever before. Second, of course, we have companies face a continued need to attract workers with technological and other specialized skills. And third, an organization's employment brand is now open and transparent. And we all know that with social media out there. So job candidates can easily see if a company is a good place to work for or not. If we look at the engagement levels from a definition perspective, if we talk about actively disengaged employees, they aren't just unhappy at work. They're busy acting out their unhappiness. You can actually see that on a daily basis. And I'm sure many of you are probably smiling and even know who those actively disengaged people are. Every day, these workers undermine what the engaged co-workers are accomplishing. Then we have the guys who are in the middle. These are the people that I actually talk about who are sitting on the fence most of the time. They're semi-engaged, but they're not really fully engaged. They are employees who are essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through their work. They're putting time, not energy or passion, into their work. And we know there's many of the employees you can put time in. They come in at 8, they leave at 5, and we know their time is done, and they, wow, what a great day of work I've done. But the question is, how effective and efficient have they been in their actual jobs? And that's when we go to the engaged employees. They work with passion and feel a profound connection to their company. They drive innovation and move the organization forward. Constant growth and development for both the organization and the employee. So the question is, if you had to do an assessment on your organization currently, what percentage would actually be engaged, semi-engaged, and what percentage would be actively disengaged as such? If I take you to the next slide, you will see the worldwide study that was done by Gallup between 2009 and 2012. There are some updated results I'll share with you shortly. But if you look at that worldwide, now this for me is the shocking result, is that engaged employee worldwide up to 2012, we're only looking at about 13% worldwide. Not engaged, 63%, actively disengaged, 24%. Now the actively disengaged is the group that I might say, these are the guys that really shouldn't be in the jobs that they should be. They need to find and do something else. However, the people that are not engaged, 63%. Now, think about if we could turn that 63% into being properly engaged just through ecometrics by changing and looking at the environment that meets their needs, what would happen to our profitability of our organizations? Some of the stats, in other words, about 1 in 8 workers, roughly in 180 million employees studied, are actually found only to be engaged. So that is only your 13% that we spoke about earlier that is engaged. And by the way, this is over 142 countries, right? Here's some more results based on other areas. If we look at Middle East, North Africa, for example, we only got about 10% engagement levels. 55% is what we need to look at turning around. If we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, 10%, 57% to turn around. Let's look at East Asia, 6%, 68% to turn around. Now, these are shocking figures that we need to look at as to why is it that many people are actually not engaged in the organizations. 2015 Gallup results in November prove that a slight drop from 32.8 in 2015 to the beginning of 2016 actually at 32.1. And there's a reason for that we're going to come to when we do the organizational health. So the bulk of employees worldwide, which is 63%, are not engaged. 24% are actively engaged, and in rough numbers, this translates into approximately 900 million that is not engaged, and 340 million actively disengaged. Now, ladies and gents, those are large figures in terms of that. The question we need to ask that if Peter Drucker says that you can't manage what you can't measure, currently in your organization, what's your engagement levels? In your team, what's your engagement levels? Do you know what they are? Because we cannot manage it or make a strategic priority out of organizational health unless we understand what the engagement levels are. So the first step is for us to run and do our engagement levels exercise. So apart from that, what else do we need to measure? We need to measure well-being well-being indicators, which is our human capital balance scorecard. And that's the second area. So a study done by McKinsey and Company over a decade of research, 500 organizations, 600,000 employees, 900 books and articles from academic journals, actually shows that if we look at the ultimate competitive advantage in every organization came to one thing, and that is organizational health. So when we look at organizational health, it is the ability to function effectively, cope adequately, to change appropriately, and to grow from within. It's the capacity for the organization to compete, not only today, but tomorrow. And it's the ability to get aligned at a world-class level and to renew. So we look at some of the research. One of the important things that the source, which is Dr. Jessica Price of the Eye Opener Institute, has founded, if we start firstly identifying what our engagement levels are, and then secondly, looking at how do we use that to create organizational health as a strategic priority. You know that across the screen you have a pendulum. You know that science, anyone who knows the swinging spheres and who we can be enlightened with from Sir Isaac Newton, or physics, dealing with the flow of energy. So if we look at the transfer of energy, if organizational health becomes a strategic priority, that automatically will transfer the energy to a state of increase or retention by a factor of 5. We get energy increased by a factor of 6, 36% more motivated employees, goal achievement increased by 31, sick leave down by a factor of 10, and of course, last but not least, productivity increased by 50%. Now, it might sound very simple, but in actual fact, it's a long process, but it starts with measuring of employee engagements. It starts with developing a strategic plan around organizational health, and then in turn, you have a pendulum effect on every single one of those areas as such, as Dr. Jessica Price-Jones from the Eye Opener Institute has elaborated. So once we've actually looked at organizational health, we can then start looking at our asset. And we talk about understanding our greatest asset. And that is what drives people. How do we understand each other? Because we can have organizational health, we can have better employee engagement if it starts with the people. So if you look at some of the research that was done, and as I've mentioned, you're all most familiar with you are our most valued asset. The question is that fact or fiction? And that is that lip service, or have we actually valued and measured our asset? And this is one of the ways that we can do it, is that our people in their balance sheets, if they're not, let's measure their value and see what drives them into action, and then change the environment to meet that requirement. In other words, in that way, we'll be protecting and celebrating our most valued asset because they are being recognized for who they are, and the environment changes accordingly, and looking at culture. So the same study that was done by Deloitte on the global human capital trends, when asked an employer, and they said that they want more engaged employees. When asked to an employee, their one wish was just this, and it's as simple as psychological air, to be understood and acknowledged. And that's all they're looking for. And if we can assess our people to identify what drives them, we're actually giving them that psychological air to breathe again and to be able to function and feel real. So 3 key drivers here is for employee engagement: relationship with immediate supervisors, the belief in their senior leadership, pride in working for the actual company, and that all is giving them psychological air. The attitude and actions of the immediate supervisor can enhance the employee engagement or can create an atmosphere when an employee becomes disengaged. It's that very thin line to within every organization, right? The study revealed that a caring manager is one of the key elements. A manager's ability to build strong relationships with employees and build strong team interactions and lead in a person-centered environment is another important area. And if we have to put all this together, I'd like you to think of a car fuel gauge and consider that as your well-being indicators in your organization. organization. And basically that will tell you how full your well-being indicator is or not, depending on the type of fuel you're going to put into that. So if you look at your personal driving dynamics as such, that personal driving dynamics are the people that you are putting into your fuel gauge. And that's going to tell you whether your fuel gauge is empty or full. If you get the right people with the right driving dynamics, you can have a very full gauge as such. So when we're looking at employee getting the right people for the right environment, if the picture in front of you, you look at a lot of dolphins that are very seamless in their circles. And if I take these same dolphins who seem very seamless and happy, and I move them to this particular environment, most definitely they will not survive, because you're putting them into a swamp where the environment doesn't meet their needs. Let's take another example. If we look at, I'm sure some of you know who this is, in Washington, D.C., at a metro station on a cold January morning in 2017, this man, also known as Joshua Bell, with a violin, played 6 Bach pieces for about 45 minutes. The musician played continuously. Only 6 people stopped and listened for a short while. And about 20 gave him money, but continued to walk at their normal pace. And if you take a guess, the man actually only collected $32 for the day. He finished playing and silently took over. No one even noticed and no one even applauded. There was no recognition at all. If we take the same man, that no one knew this, but the violinist was Joshua Bell, one of the greatest musicians in the world. He played one of the most intricate pieces ever written with a violin worth $3.5 million. 2 days before that, Joshua Bell was sold out at a theater in Boston, where the seats average $100 each to sit and listen to him play that same music. So if we look at Joshua Bell, who actually was put on the train station the day before, his skills, his assets, his value was not recognized because the environment in which he was placed was not suitable for that particular drive. Just like the dolphins being put into the actual swamp, or just like your people with such value and skills being functioning in an environment that doesn't meet their needs and their requirements. And we need to seriously start looking at our environment as to how do we actually change that. In South Africa, we have a Zulu greeting that is what says Sawubona, and it means I see you. And there's a response that says Nkona. It means I'm here, I'm acknowledged, please acknowledge me. The same kind of thing you might have, for example, in Arabic, as an example, is Ana afham, I see you, I understand you. And of course, you have Ana hain, which means I'm here, acknowledge me. So the driving dynamics actually is that. It assesses each of your unique language of expression. It prioritizes in order of personal hierarchy at the very core of your engine room. And if we can do that with our people, imagine what we can do in terms of the ripple effect they might have every particular function in the organization. So understanding the precise impact on as an individual, but also as a group, because as a group, you'll find that they'll be able to function more cohesively and engagement levels will be increased. So essentials for all the leaders. Firstly is measure organizational health. We need to identify what are the well-being indicators. There are excellent tools on the market. As a coach myself, I work with various organizations in terms of how to measure the organizational health, how to measure the employee engagement levels, and of course advise in terms of the driving dynamics. Tracks organizational. Then after you've measured it, it's important that we track it and check it every 3 months. It's a heartbeat, and it's about checking what is our heartbeat actually doing. Is our pressure high? Is it low? When do we check it? Optimizing it by getting the full potential, and of course in that way increasing productivity and financial performance. So when we're adding value through these measurements, it actually is a reverse effect. So if we identify the culture and the environment in terms of what drives us, it will have an impact on our capital balance scorecard, which is our well-being indicator, or our what they call the organizational health, and of course then in turn on employee engagement. So it's a ripple effect from the back. Driving dynamics, well-being indicators, and of course employee engagement. Here's an example of a graph that shows you the kind of driving dynamics. So people are normally scored on variety, teamwork, freedom of lifestyle, financial compensation, ability utilization, etc., etc. So if we look at all of that, here is a sample study in terms of one that was done with a particular organization. And the nice thing about this, if you look at participant number 1 to about 17, these individuals are part of one group in one team. And as a manager, as a leader, if I've done this assessment on all my individuals, I'm able now to see them and acknowledge them for the environment in which they're actually functioning. So I'm going to pick up all those that can function in a predictable environment as an example. So if you look at, for example, number 16, which is one of the primary dynamics, if I know that I've got change in the organization, the people that are low on predictable environment, like for example, participant 7, example participant 6, I need to manage them with much more difference compared to the others, right? Let's look at, for example, people with financial compensation. I have participant number 6 who's extremely high in compensation, and which means that they need to be valued by financial basis. But there are others, for example, like participant 14 and 15, who are very low. For them, they are higher on things like authority. So I give them time that they can actually meet with other leaders and learn from them and develop from them, as opposed to compensating them with actual money. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the dolphin back in the ocean and saying, function in an environment that meets and suits your actual working conditions of what drives you into action. Right? Those are just but a few. So adding value through measurement, we measure the human capital balance scorecard, which we know measures, for example, the heartbeat of the organization. And here's an example of some of the well-being indicators as such. So if we have a look at the well-being indicators, you've got 7 constructs: achievement, satisfaction, expectation, frustration management. And here's a sample of the kind of results you get. So when you look at this, you'll find there's a direct correlation to the well-being indicator compared to the actual driving dynamics. So when measured, a person who's low, for example, who really needs attention on job satisfaction, if you look at their well-being indicators and you then look at their driving dynamics, you'll be able to see that they're probably functioning in an environment that is not satisfying to them. And you'll be able to see the two together if measured together. So here is an example of a team. You can pinpoint immediately and see, for example, where the problem areas are. You are able then to manage it. And this is what we're talking about, making organizational health a strategic priority. Because if this is monitored on a 3-month basis, you'll be able to pinpoint and nip areas in the bud. Right, so just coming to an end in terms of employee engagement levels. Yeah, some of the stats. And again, the question I asked you is, where's your organization? Does it feature there? Do you know what the levels are? And if you do, what are you doing about making organizational health a strategic priority? What is your strategy behind that? How often are you going to measure this and look at where the problem areas are? How often are you going to measure the driving dynamics of these people and identify where the problem areas are? Right, so there's some of the results that are there. The benefits, as we've mentioned, is that you gain when you measure this is increased staff retention, increased staff performance, enhanced communication, effective and practical leadership development, career path management, and so forth and so forth. It's endless. But of course, you must be able to experience it first in order to reap these benefits as such. So again, here is by reference of Dale Carnegie training. From a conclusion perspective, is looking at caring managers and workplace environment. How do we actually get that? Is by creating and engaged employees, customer engagement, increasing sales and profits, and of course, increasing in stock price. business leaders worldwide must raise the bar on employee engagement. In other words, we need to not just measure it, but we need to look at how do we improve on it. If you look at in the last 2 years, it's increased only by 2%, but it's dropped again in 2016 and 17 by almost 1%. And one of the main reasons is that we are measuring it, but we're not making organizational health a strategic priority in our particular organizations and writing it within strategy. Right? So basically, to come to a conclusion, and I'm sure I think I've actually just gone over 5 minutes on my presentation into question time, but what we're actually looking at is how do we have all these systems for reliability and measuring and improving, but what we're not doing is looking at the people. That is the value and the asset of the organization. And with those few thoughts, I now leave you for questions. In conclusion, on the presentation is to say that we constantly look at changing everything around us within our organizations, and what we don't do is that the one sure thing that we can change in this world is ourselves, and that's the people. Then we change the world in the way that we see it, as well as the way that it responds to us. The challenge is not to get others to respect you, but rather just to become respectable through the knowledge and lifelong learning. And in conclusion, I'd like to actually say thank you very much, and I'm quite happy to take some questions. Mr. Charfaray, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hawa, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you have any questions and want to have an audio conversation with Hawa. So let me go to the first question we have in the box. Ms. Hawa, could you tell us what is the difference between ecometrics and psychometrics?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. From ecometrics, as we looked at in the presentation, ecometrics actually looks at human adaptability to the actual environment. So it looks at how do you adapt to the current environment in which you're functioning. Whereas from a psychometric perspective, we're actually looking at the psychology behind women mind or the human mind in terms of their character, their personality, as opposed to just the driving dynamics in the environment. Now, we all have career drivers. We have dynamics that drives us within a function, but it generally stays the same when it comes to psychometrics, and it kindly puts you in a box. So ecometrics complements it to say that it will change, and we measure it every 6 months to every year, and you'll find generally changes, especially if your job opposition has changed. And that's one of the main differences. And of course, there are a few others as well.
Very much. We have a few more, so let me ask you. Okay, why is it that the worldwide results through Gallup studies shows very little movement in the employee engagement levels over the last few years?
Okay, so if we look at in the last 2 years as an example, there's been a change of approximately maybe just 2% in the USA. Worldwide, it hasn't changed at all. It's been stagnant. In some of the African countries and the Middle East, in fact, it has actually decreased the engagement levels. And what we found is that in many organizations, people are measuring employee engagement. It's a big topic at the moment. But the question is, what are we doing about matching the engagement levels to the organizational health? And from there, of course, to the driving dynamics that manages the engagement levels. For example, if you look at an organization, they'll measure the engagement levels. They look at what we can actually do. And 9 out of 10 times, it is around what we can do to improve the actual business and relationship with the manager together with the employees. What we're not looking at is what is it that the actual employee actually needs in terms of the dolphin in the ocean, and bringing the ocean to the actual employee. In other words, creating an environment that meets the requirements. And one of the first steps, and the important area that has been left out over the years, is to measure the driving dynamics of the individuals and match that to your employee engagement levels. So when you do that, you're actually looking at a holistic person. You're looking at the person and the individual. You're looking at the environment in what it needs to sustain, but then you also look at the different people, and this goes back to the fuel gauge I mentioned earlier. Taking the right fuel and putting that fuel in is going to depend on how that gauge actually gets higher or lower. If we don't put the right people with the right skills and the right knowledge within, but not just skills and knowledge, we're talking about behavioral patterns, we're talking about adaptability to an environment, then we can create a holistic overview. So the advice would be to actually look at that holistically in 3 areas: engagement levels, organizational health, and make that a strategic priority by checking it every 6 months to a year, like a heartbeat, and then look at how do we change course. And then, of course, finally, the 3rd area is understanding people and giving them psychological air and creating an environment where there can be dolphins in an ocean.
All right, thank you very much. We have a caller's raised a hand. We have Mr. Shahid Siddiqui. Mr. Siddiqui, if you can hear us, could you please introduce yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, Hawa, this is Shahid Siddiqui from Pakistan. Currently, I'm based in Riyadh. I have one question regarding engagement level of employees. That is, right in the current prevailing economy, employee companies are not offering that much compensation expectations in terms of salary and benefits. So how we can able to manage the engagement level in such scenarios?
Okay, Mr. Shahid, thank you for your question. I'm just going to quickly refer to a particular slide, which I'm just moving to at the moment. If you look at, for example, in particular, this particular slide that I'm showing you now, sorry, we're just getting there. This is regards to the driving dynamics. Yes, understandably, if you look at the economy at the moment, finance is one of the big issues from an economical perspective. When we know that performance levels are actually measured and people's increases and their bonuses is very much depend on performance levels. But the one thing we're forgetting as coaches and mentors and leaders is that every person is driven by a different dynamic. If I look at by the way, the slide in front of you is a real case scenario, which was done with one of my clients in a particular division. And if you look at financial compensation, you've got financial compensation, you have financial guarantee. And if you look at that, you have many of them which are sitting in the yellow, the pink, and the red in that. In other words, that is the least of their driving dynamics. Yes, there are a few, like, for example, participant 2, who is a 17, participant 5 is a 19, and 18, that means they're very high, it's a primary dynamic. Then you have participant 8, 9, these are all primary dynamics for those. So out of the 17, you've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people out of 17. The balance of them, it's secondary and idlers. For them, their most important is personal development, result orientation, ability utilization, authority. Look at how many of them wants to be in authority. So just changing the environment doesn't have to be financial, doesn't need to cost a company. Just giving or changing the task related for that individual can drive them and get them more engaged, because now you're putting the dolphin in the ocean. So if you look at these people that are all year high in authority, allowing them to make decisions on important matters within the organization, obviously within limits that the organization acquires, giving them more detail oriented, because you can see a lot of them are very detail orientated. They want to be driven by results, sharing results with them, getting involved with the results. Look at the majority of them. There's 1 out of the 17 which is slightly low on personal development. Just develop them in areas that matters to them, will allow them to become more engaged. And this is where the coaching comes in. It takes time, but it allows you to be able to do the assessment so that you can identify drivers other than just financial. And those that are financial, if you can afford it, fantastic, great, give it. But if you don't, then look at other areas that can be developed as well. I trust that that answers your question. Please feel free to liaise with me even after the session to discuss further.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Shahid, for asking the question. And we have another one last question. What are the benefits of identifying the personal driving dynamics of an individual as part of a team?
Okay, great. So I think basically this particular answer that I've just mentioned earlier would help with that as well, because when you identify personal driving dynamics, you're able to choose your teams for various projects appropriately as well. And that allows more engagement. So if you know people that, for example, are high on results, and you know of others in the team that are high in authority, you know others that are high in creativity and low on creativity, you choose them according to the actual projects. And in that way, you're able to get people more engaged because they're doing what they know they're best at. So for example, a person who's not high on risk in the same team here, you wouldn't put that person onto a particular project that needs high risk. But you will put him there to ensure that he checks or she checks for those that are taking too much of risk. So it helps to balance the entire process when working with them. So it's important that we do measure the driving dynamics, and in that way we can then fit people into correct positions, correct projects, and also it gets to, I see you, I understand you, I acknowledge you. Now I know why you are so rushed for certain tasks, because you're so keen on ability, you're so keen on detail orientated, and it just gives that understanding of psychological A again.
Well, thank you very much. And we have one last caller raise a hand. We have Dr. Muhammad Rashad, doctor of a regular caller. Could you please introduce once again yourself and ask the question?
Hello, I'm Dr. Rashad. I'm in the College of Business in one of the public universities in Riyadh. And thank you, Ms. Hawa, for a wonderful presentation. I think it's just a thought, it's not a question. I think what traditionally is happening in the history is that the organizations are more focused on the profitability. And when they're reaching that target levels from the top management, the sense of not feeling for engagement is not there. The priorities are profitability, and from profitability comes your cost reduction or becoming leaner or improving your value chain. Whereas when your profitability is hit, then it's a time when the top management realizes that, yeah, we have to think about the employees' engagement or disengagement, or are they assets or the liabilities, etc. So my thought is that like that inculcating that culture from the very beginning when the organization's formed of a happiness spot or a compassionate centric kind of organization, which today's businesses are very much founding on these fundamentals. So thought is that when you're talking about that, you said the semi-engaged are like the sleepwalkers, you know. So I just thought of adding up is that activity disengaged are actually the dead walkers, you know, and the engaged are actually the flying walking, you know. So so that's my comment. Like, thank you very much.
All right. Dr. Mohammed, thank you very much. You've just hit the nail on the head there, is that if we start this right from the beginning, our process becomes much easier later. And absolutely identify those sleepwalkers, identify those dead workers, and then look at, because it's not just that they can't do it, they can. It's just that they're not engaged enough, and we need to engage them further. So you've hit the nail on the head, and you just summarized it exceptionally well for me. So thank you very much, and I look forward to interacting with you more.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad.
For giving me the opportunity. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for asking the question and the comments. So, well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Ms. Hawa Charfaray, thank you very much. I really want to thank you. But before we conclude, any last concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
I think I'd just like to say thank you firstly again to you, Dr. Ali, who presented and moderated the session exceptionally well. Also thank you to Madinah Institute of Leadership. And I also challenge every leader and every CEO out there that mentions that your most valued asset is your people. Are they on your balance sheet? Have you measured them? Have you measured their value? Do you know, can you put this particular graph up and say that this is my people and I know how to change and manipulate my cultural environment so I can get the best out of them? And if you can't, then you need to start looking at how do you engage coaches and mentors to help you through the process in order to see the increase in productivity and performance from your people. So once again, I thank you all for listening and thank everyone for their precious time here today. I'm able to answer many of your questions and interact with you on another level over social media. Please keep in touch, and thank you once again.
Well, thank you very much, and I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for your time and delivering this live, intriguing presentation. So thank you very much once again, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs of webinars and equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.